Morning. So this is the second part of our convo. Here, get in here.
Yeah, so we still have Katie Meyer. We have Robert and Jeff in the studio. So you were talking about just listening to some shows on WHIV. You said the New Orleans Abortion Fund had a show.
Yeah, I was listening to them earlier today, maybe at around 2:30, and they were playing a podcast where people were sharing their abortion stories.
Cool.
And I thought it was...
like a shout your abortion sort of thing?
Yeah, like just... I thought it was great. I think New Orleans Abortion Fund is doing so much great work, and I feel like they've really become a loud presence in the city. And maybe, I don't know, like sometimes I wonder, though, if that's just like the circles that I surround myself in. Like, it's sort of like the Twitter phenomenon where, like, you know, you curate everything you listen to or watch, and so then it seems much bigger. I don't know.
You make yourself a media bubble.
Yeah. But I mean, they're like, I feel like people are really like listening to the work that they're doing, and it's really like resonating, which I think is super cool because so many people I know give to Planned Parenthood, which is great, but they're a national organization, and so it's cool to see little funds.
So can you
like
tell us
them.
just a little bit about New Orleans Abortion Fund and about what some of the projects they're working on are?
Yeah, so I'm not
that
an
you
expert.
speak for the, and you don't speak for the organization or anything like that. Just what you know about.
I basically just know them as an organization that provides funding for folks who are looking to get an abortion, because we know that these are things that are not, your insurance won't cover it, especially if you're on Medicare or Medicaid. So they basically are providing financial services for folks seeking out an abortion. And
it's a public health issue.
Yeah. And so, I try to support them in ways that I can, but I by no means know the intricate ins and outs of all their day-to-day work. But.
Cool. And do you know what time their show comes on?
I don't. I just was in my car today and I was listening to it, and the executive director was speaking, and then she was talking about an event that they had last week at the Howling Wolf, which I wasn't able to go to.
I saw the Facebook event for that.
Yeah, and they had like great people like Valerie Sassafras, who's always really fun, and DJ Soul Sister. So I guess I'm thinking about things like that, like how they're.
When was it again? Do you remember?
It was today that I heard. So what is today? Today is Thursday, and I think it was around like 2:30.
Thursday from Pro Frequency by New Orleans Abortion Fund. So that comes on from 2 to 4 on WHIV LP New Orleans. I should know that, but there are so many great shows that you can listen to on 102.3 FM, and also you can stream it anywhere in the world. WHIV LP, WHIVFM.org/listen. So we were talking a little bit before we went off on the regular feed about charter school network that went on strike. And one of the interesting things that I really appreciate that you said was that teachers and teachers unions, school workers unions, and I really do need to work on not just focusing on teachers. All school workers made the strikes in not only the red states from last year, but the Chicago strikes in 2012 and the Los Angeles, Oakland, and Denver strikes in 2019 possible. But you mentioned a shift from lobbying to organizing. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of unions focus on backing and canvassing for politicians, and instead of providing training opportunities for teachers to become activists, right? Because we know that strikes they don't happen overnight, right? Like it takes an incredible amount of work, and like being an organizer and being an activist is like a full-time job, right? Like it's when I went to social work school, I focused on macro social work, which a big piece of that
we have so many social workers on this show.
A big piece of that is learning how to organize, right? And I think that what I would love to see unions do is take a little bit more of a role in that, so that teachers feel like they have a space where they can learn the skills that they need. And I think that that's where sort of the DSA kind of like fits in, and they were really they were also a big reason why teacher strikes worked, right?
Yeah,
there were local
they provided
chapters.
a lot of support, specifically strike support in the red states and in Los Angeles and the states from last year, the cities from last year. Really, it wasn't entire states; it was large cities that went on strike, and DSA provided strike support in the form of either food or tacos or whatever throughout both of those events. I do wonder, is there a role for DSA in the organizing side of that? And does that get tricky with the way that labor unions sort of behave, especially when it comes to community and so-called outside forces? Even though I'm a DSA member and a teachers union member, they're sort of viewed as entities, as outside forces. What do you think about that in terms of like what kind of a place could DSA fill in that in terms of organizing? Because that's work that's not necessarily being done by these labor unions.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question that I don't know if I know the answer to, but I guess I think that one of the things that needs to happen at a grander scale. I don't mean to put you on the spot
too bad, but you can sort of like chop it up about it,
is like this idea of like coalition building, right? So it's like so I guess what you're saying is that, and if I'm understanding it correctly, is that the teacher unions and an organization like DSA are separate, and there's not necessarily an opportunity to infiltrate?
Infiltrate is definitely not the word I would use, especially considering the levels of trust that a lot of mainstream labor unions have for activists and community organizations. But I guess what I mean to say is, especially for, and again, I'm not expecting like the answer. I'm just kind of like trying to pick your brain and talk about it a little bit. But so, for example, there are teachers that are already there in teachers unions, and they're also already members of organizations like DSA or any other kind of groups. It could be like Step Up Louisiana, or it could be something else. This is Louisiana New Orleans podcast, so that's what I got to work with right now. Step Up's the local for the Center for Popular Democracy. Anyway, what are some ways that they could sort of like get these people in these groups and kind of like organize under all of these banners and potentially bring these groups closer together, like the unions and these groups closer together, so like about the left labor divide that people talk about endlessly online, and I get so sick of it. Right. But it's a real thing. But anyway.
Yeah. And I definitely did not mean to use the word infiltrate. Thank you.
No. I'm not like policing your language or whatever.
I'm not always great at picking out the exact vocabulary word I'm picking up. I mean, I think that like the first step might be to see where that overlap is, right? Because you said it, you're like, I am a union member and I'm also a teacher and a DSA member, right? Like that like intersection there, I think is important, and not necessarily something that we're super aware of. And so I think that like part of it also too is for each organization to do their own sort of pulse check, right? So like and I'm not involved in the DSA labor committee, and I'm about to leave the city, so I don't really.
You don't speak for any of the organizations.
I don't speak for anybody, but like
neither do I.
I'm wondering right now what the labor committee is doing around like teacher unions and teacher labor, things like that, and like that might be a good place to start, is just like transparency from both organizations,
right?
Because right now I think that like it's a little opaque to me, and so I don't think that you can like start creating like coalitions or partnerships until it's very clear what like that everyone's on the same page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. But I'm so glad you brought up that they should be working, because we actually were we worked on a team that put together an event, and we talked about this so much on the show, and we actually talked with we hosted the former guest of the show, friend of the show, Eric Blanc. He came to town and he talked about his book, Red State Revolt. We did have an executive board member from a local teachers union, but that was sort of like the extent of the she didn't speak as that executive board member, she spoke as herself, and we sort of like definitely wanted to make sure that wasn't a problem at first. I guess the thing is that it would have been so much more of an effective building opportunity. And this is something that I'm not saying like, oh shucks, there went the opportunity and it's over. But like, how can we sort of like build into bringing these groups in to these events that are going to continue to happen? I mean, like community groups are going to start to fill in the organizing space if it's not there. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that event was a great first step. Mm-hmm. But again, I think it's about everyone also clarifying what their goals are too, because I think that like when everyone has different ideas of what it means to be in a teachers union, right?
That's true.
So I think that
it's not even necessarily a problem.
Right. And that's okay, right? Because like not everyone needs to think the same thing. And I think that there needs to be sort of like more open conversations within the organizations, and then maybe I also think that there's like more of an opportunity to engage more people, right? So like you also have this thing where in a lot of places you're automatically in the union, right? But that doesn't mean that you're an active or an engaged member. And like that was my experience. Like that was my experience when I was teaching in Massachusetts, is that I was part of a union, but I didn't actually really know what they did, right? Like
there was no onboarding process,
right? And so I didn't feel empowered to become an active member. And now actually having moved back to New Orleans and really sort of reconnected with my understanding of the importance of being a part of this, like I'm really excited to go back and push what I want to get out of the union. But I also have to understand that like that might be different than what everybody else is doing. Right. And so like one of the big things that I want to talk about is I want to be like, hey, Lawrence, Massachusetts was put under state receivership in 2012. I think it was 2012. It's 2019. I read 2 years ago that we were going to start moving out of that receivership. Like where are we?
Why aren't we?
Right. Like where are we? And like how can we really push to get democracy back into our public schools?
Localized democracy,
right.
Specifically. Yeah.
And I like that, right? Like that's what I want to do, but I don't know what the other hundreds of members are thinking. They might just be thinking about, how's the new collective bargaining agreement going? Like, are we like, or like,
a lesson for the next day, or why aren't they getting any planning? It could be almost like more or direct things.
And also like not wanting to talk about the state receivership, because we also know that when a state receivership happens, there's a risk there, right? Like, well, I don't want to lose my job. Like, I don't want to, right? Because when that happens, we still have a union, but its power is weaker than if it existed before. So I didn't really answer the question. But I don't.
Well, you talked about a lot of the sort of things, and I think you did answer the question in a very specific way, because you talked about engaging with members. And as sort of like I constantly tell people in my my own sort of like organizing within my union, because there's a lot of things called like third partyization of unions, where we essentially say, well, it's us, it's the school board, and it's the union essentially, and they'll basically talk about the unions as though they're a separate entity from the workers, and there needs to be sort of like clarification that unions are a collection of individuals who band together to essentially work in the interest of workers. So every worker in a union is a part of that union. So even if you're not getting like the official union leadership, is to to like sign off on events. It wouldn't hurt if they did, but it's important that you're talking to people who are part of these organizations, and they come into these spaces, and that is essentially building a sort of consciousness amongst them.
And I think another piece of it too is that in order to really have meaningful engagement and to empower all members to be active, like everyone has to be well taken care of. And we know that like teacher burnout is really real. And I think that was something that I was experiencing over the past 2 years that made it really difficult for me to feel like I could be an active part of anything outside of just trying to survive on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And I think that particularly in New Orleans, you know, our teachers here are mostly working extended hours. So like they're coming into school, the school day starts at 7:15, 7:30, and then it doesn't end until after 4 o'clock.
Yeah, that's an extremely long day.
And that's just the school hours. That doesn't take into account the pre-prep and the post-prep after kids leave. And so I think another big piece of it too is really making sure that our teachers have what would be the opposite of burnout? Right? like self-care is like such a buzzword that like means I don't want to be like, oh, teachers have self-care, right? But like teachers feel like their mental health, like they're at a balance in their mental health. I think that that's also something that like doesn't get talked enough about.
Yeah, because I mean, the way that, especially the way, and I'm gonna have to show you this book that I have, but essentially there's a sense of I want to make a quick distinction. And I keep feel like I'm policing your language, but this is what everybody says. Everybody says burnout. You hear burnout all the time. But there's a really important distinction between that, which when you think burnout, that's like an overwork. You're doing too much work and all the stuff. And that's why teachers quit. And there's this sort of phenomenon that's been written about by a teacher up in Maine. She's a professor now, but she was a former classroom teacher, called demoralization. Essentially what it is I mean, in a sense, it's an alienation from your labor and a devaluation of your labor. And essentially, the things that we were talking about in the main part of the show, the testing is not a reflection in any real way. The teacher evaluations are not a reflection in any real way. You don't get viewed as getting any credit for social emotional development of children. And so you take all of these things, you're saying like this situation is hopeless, and you quit. And that's demoralization as opposed to just this complete volume of work, which is what burnout is.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news and also a nag, but that's just straight. That's what capitalism do. Because I mean, capitalism, our whole system is judged. Capitalism is so ingrained in our culture, it infects our social situations and everything. It's all encompassing. So when you have work where you don't have a quota of widgets to produce, and you don't have like physical, tangible like goods that you're creating, capitalism has to come up with some kind of way to measure your performance, and that be standardized testing. And my job's the same way. Like I'm a healthcare worker. Like people they don't know how to quantify it or how to rate one, instead of saying, oh, you're quantifying it by enriching people's lives. No, there has to be some tangible way to do it, and the whole system just trips over itself trying to figure out how to do that. And what happens is the workers end up chasing their own tail, and they get burnt out, and then they quit, they leave.
That's exactly right. A quantification of qualitative factors. Anyway, I just wanted to make that that's something that I did not even realize until about a year ago, and it's sort of like, yeah, that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I love that. I'm always amazed at people that always know the exact right way to say something, because I talk to process, so I'm like, here's this thing I'm going to put out into the universe, and then on self-reflection I'm like, there was a much better way for me to say that.
But it's not wrong to chop up words, and you should definitely not be afraid to sort of say things that are potentially not like appropriate for a particular situation, but there are ways that language can put things into your mind that sort of changes the way that you see it.
Oh, totally. And like that is like I love that distinction, and because they're different, right? Those are two different things that you're talking about. And I was talking with a friend recently, and this sort of reminds me about how like capitalistic structures just like basically influence every single thing we do. And we are talking about, and this is sort of what both of you are just saying, how do we measure if we're doing a good job, particularly with work, right? And like
we're obsessed with that,
right? And a friend of mine was like, "Oh well, I always thought that I was doing a good job when I just felt pushed to my absolute limit, spent, right?" Because there was this association with if I have a high output, right? If I'm pouring my soul into this, then I must be doing a good job. And she just recently had to really shift that thinking because she's in a work situation where there's a much more appropriate work-life balance. And she was like, but I don't feel exhausted. Am I doing a good job? Right? And I think that that's very real. And I think in human service work in particular, we tend to associate our level of exhaustion or our level of perhaps like demoralization with, okay, I'm doing great work.
Yeah, I feel terrible, so I must be doing a good job.
Right. Which I think also speaks to sort of this like similar mentality with publics, like AmeriCorps public service work, right? Like, well, I'm doing good work because I'm not really getting paid anything, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
they're telling me it's a really good work, so that's why I believe it's really good work.
But meanwhile, what it should be is, well, you should be doing important work and being appropriately compensated for it. But instead, we make people think that they can make $50 a week to do, you know,
they're taking advantage of the fact that you believe that it's good work, and they're using that in place of wages. It's almost like the it's almost like the emotional labor thing, which I don't want to. Emotional labor is such a fraught term because it's sort of like a very sort of gendered term specifically for women, which is not definitely something that does exist in a patriarchal society or whatever. Not or whatever, you know what I mean. But like it is something that is keyed upon. This emotional labor is essentially unpaid labor, and it's not only done by women. It's done by people throughout. So I give my example of, and I'm not like trying to invalidate it as a term for sure, but like I sort of think of like times that service workers in restaurants. If somebody comes in and is a complete jerk to you, the entire time, and they tip you $0 and you can't tell them F you, you have to do an emotional labor to sort of like bury that down. And it's, is that like am I kind of like out of my lane, sort of like using the same term for that?
I don't think so, because I definitely experienced that with like this.
Like not being able to tell your boss.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the super perverse thing about it. If you, as much as like unfulfilling as it is, I mean, I'm sure there are people that are completely fulfilled by like sales work. Like I've done stuff where like I was a salesman, and it's almost like if you've seen Glengarry Glen Ross, it's the best you can hope for is not just to make a living. It's to be so good at your job that no one can fuck with you. Like no one can tell you anything, because you'll be like, hey, you see how many widgets I fucking produce? Go fuck yourself. Like, no. Like, and I've been in that position and it feels good, but at the end of the day, you're like, it's not fulfilling at all.
It's like Sisyphus pushing the ball of wax over the mountain, right? But anyway, what are your thoughts on the use of that language?
To be honest, I hadn't really thought about it in the way that you are talking about it. I don't even know that much about emotional labor. There was the New York Times piece. I think that was the one that came out where it was like it sort of became this big thing. I think it's interesting to mention service workers and talking about, right, like how when someone comes in to a restaurant, like, right, like the service work, the restaurant worker or the service worker is, everyone believes it's their job to make you feel good as the consumer. And so I think that there is like a certain level of...
That's work.
Right. But it also, like, there's like a hierarchy there where a lot of people assume that the service worker is on the bottom. And that which is should not be the case, but it is. And I so that's sort of what I thought about when you were saying that, and it reminds me of all of the criticisms that AOC receives for being
Alexandria
a former
Ocasio-Cortez,
for being a former bartender, and
it's
it
total, like, and it's so funny.
Well, it's the memes that obviously, like, in our own bubble that get shoved around. It's like, conservative, you should pull yourself up by the bootstraps. AOC, okay. No, not like that.
Right. And I think the other piece of it too is that it's scary when you actually, because people think about the jobs that she had as what is the word for, like, not like an entry level job, but
no, they're not the kind of jobs that congresswomen or men get.
But what she's doing is she's forcing people to come to terms with their discomfort of thinking about it as a job that has an immense amount of value and worth.
Right.
And it gives you an immense amount of skills. And also, if we didn't have, like, people love to go to a bar and we depend on folks.
An important part of your
like
life.
her. And
that's starting to change a little bit, but that situation, and I'm going to geek out for just a sec. That's when you talk about, like, service workers and bartenders and waiters and stuff, that's, like, unique to American capitalism, because Asian capitalism, like the Japanese, even the British don't think of like the shows you watch, like Downton Abbey or stuff like that, or like in video games and Japanese culture, like, to be a professional waiter, to be a professional bartender, a butler, it's like something that's revered because it's like you are a master of perfection. You've taken this, like, thing that's your craft and you do it perfect, and that's something to be looked up to, and that's something, like, very Japanese. Like, again, I'm geeking out, but then in Britain, there's the same kind of, like, a professional butler is something to be aspired to. Where we are in this country is like, it doesn't matter how good you do your job, whatever your position is, like whatever your class position is, that's your status, that's your caste that you can never move out of, and it's something very weird. It might be Puritanian, like. I don't understand it here as just another way to demean class. That's the only explanation I can come up with without researching it further.
Yeah. What's interesting about AOC that I find to be, like, endlessly funny is the characterization of her, sort of like by, like, right wing. She's somehow got this sort of dual effect of being, like, extremely, conniving and devious, and also at the same time extremely stupid, and ineffective.
Sorry, Jeff. We got two mics in here, and I had to pull away from Jeff. That's a very people of color thing, and let me explain that to you. Like, as far as being black, that's something that I have no surprise at all, because, okay, so I'm a black guy, so either I'm dumb and, like, subhuman, or I'm the scariest thing that ever walked to Earth. And it happens all the time when you read, like, legal cases and stuff like that. Either black kids are just stupid and good for nothings, but when you can't find a gun on them, they turn into James Bond and they're master gun hiders. So it's like, which is it? Like, am I dumb or terrifying or yeah?
No matter
what am I today? Am I the scariest thing? What am I today? I'm a scary. And the same thing with, like, being a socialist, being a leftist. Am I the scariest thing walking? Am I the reincarnation of Mao and Pol Pot, or am I a snowflake? Just let me know. Can you send me a memo for that day to tell me what I am?
Yeah, and no matter what it is, it's dangerous. Like, you're dangerously stupid or you're dangerously conniving. Or the other thing, and there's definitely, like, a degree of sexism in it, specifically with AOC as well. But she's simultaneously like, oh, she's she worked at a bar. She's too poor to be a congressperson. And then you'll have like another idiot posting like, well, that's a $700 suit. She's not poor like that. There's no possibility of like ever making these people happy.
And then I've heard this other argument because, one of the things that she's trying to do is she's trying to raise the salary for like Congress people. And when they do that, they're like, well, you just want a higher paycheck. And I'm like, no, she wants more people who come from a working class background to be able to afford this job. But it's like she's damned if she does, she's damned if she doesn't.
That's sort of the point of that kind of that kind of like you're making it so that there's no actual right thing that you can do. Damned if you do, don't if you don't. You're exactly right.
And I think that like in New York, and I have not lived in New York for years, and so this is all like things that I hear from people that I know. But the fact that she was able to win in New York City, like the New York City Democrat machine is powerful, and we're seeing that sort of play out with Tiffany Caban's recount. Just God. How powerful it really is.
What's going on with Tiffany Caban's recount? Can you just give us a 2-minute version?
I will try my best.
Whatever. Yeah.
So Tiffany Caban ran for Queens District Attorney.
She's still kind of running, right?
She is a career public defender, and so she had a very progressive campaign that was really exciting. And she was, I believe the person that she was going against, his last name is Katz.
Her name is Katz. I can't remember the first name, but on election night, they announced.
Tiffany Caban won. However, when they went to go look at the absentee ballots and the affidavit ballots, they found that the margin was small enough where they could do a recount.
Right.
Now, New York City has some of the most strict voting laws, particularly around affidavit ballots. So they threw out a ton of ballots that then lowered the margin even more. And I think
she only won by a couple hundred votes, right?
Right. Yeah. My understanding is that the margin was bigger before they did the counting.
Before they threw out all of her votes.
But then when they started to throw out all these votes and do the recount, she was behind by 15 votes.
Yeah.
Now, so the recount's been happening for a couple of weeks, but the Katz has so many resources at her disposal, whereas Tiffany Caban doesn't have as many. And so I believe the recount officially ended today, and she's like
continuously fundraising to keep her lawyers paid.
Yeah. I'm currently unemployed right now, but I'm like $5 here.
Oh my gosh.
Just trying.
You're a saint.
But it's because I also realized that like what she's going up against is so powerful. And like when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won, I was talking to someone that I know who is involved in the New York City Democratic Party, and he was very like resistant to her and really didn't even want me to bring up her name. And that's when I realized,
don't bring up her name,
right? Like, and I'm like, this is like, but
like
then
she's Voldemort,
right. But then I realized that like it's because she didn't need to reach out, like, this person that I know represents the establishment, and she doesn't need it. And so the fact that she doesn't need them absolutely infuriates them.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I just think that like she's so strong because not only is she hearing it from conservative Republicans, but she's also getting it from the people that are supposed to be supporting her, right? Like people think of New York City as this like progressive place, but it just really is sort of this like old boys club where there really just isn't, they don't want to make space for her. So then when she's like, okay, well, I don't need you to make space for me, then they're like having like a temper tantrum.
Right.
And so it's fascinating. I hope that the recount goes in Tiffany Caban's favor, but I have to say I'm skeptical.
She can still run on like Working Families Party, can't she? Because this is just the primary, right?
No, this was the actual election, which is why I was also confused because, and honestly, like the best information that I got about the recount actually was from the Working Families Party. Because so she partnered with Working Families and the DSA, and like when she gave her her victory speech, like those were like the two groups that she thanked like almost outright. And so a good friend of mine forwarded me the email that he received from the Working Families Party when the recount happened, and that was like the most transparent, thorough, like because I was like, oh, this is so opaque because the New York voting laws are just like they're so hard to understand. And one of the things, they were throwing out affidavit ballots because at one polling place, people that were filling out affidavits didn't put down that they were part of the Democratic Party, which is confusing because New York City is a closed primary state, but this wasn't the primary. This was the actual election. So why does someone have to...
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
What are you talking about?
And so one of the things that is... there was a bill that was written that hasn't been passed yet that's trying to take away some of these like restrictions that are just like so murky and leading to issues like this, right? Where like people's votes aren't being counted.
And this is due to the New York State Legislature having actually a fairly left-wing wave coming in, led by Julia Salazar, who ran in New York and supported DSA as well.
Yeah. There's been some good. There's been some great like progressive candidates that have made some big wins, but again, like they're just up against such a powerful machine.
And they want to take apart some of the power of that machine, which is actually a very important structural reform, which is great. You know, when I think about like these Caban types, the AOC, Larry Krasner in Philly, who ran for DA and won. I'm also thinking about Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley. Those kinds of people are also, in a sort of like duality sense, sort of held up in mainstream Democratic circles as like these extremely important next wave of the future or whatever. But then at the same time, people like Nancy Pelosi will tell them to go play with their toys in the corner, you know, and expect them to back down, saying, well, you don't actually have any support. You don't have actually any votes. So that's a similar, almost like a nationalized level of that regime, but they also kind of want to have it both ways so that they can cash in on the things that they do value, which is very often sort of like their identity, you know, as women of color, et cetera, which is totally cool that they're getting elected to these positions. But when it comes to the actual like policies that they want to implement and the reforms that they want to push forward, they're like, well, these are just a bunch of kids, you know?
Right. And I think that like one of the things that I hear a lot is they're like, well, they're not doing it the way that it should be done. And I'm like, exactly.
The way that's got us into this problem, the one that's got us into this horrible position where workers are completely like, you know, on their knees and you know, corporations fill all the public space that was formerly filled by, you know, public services.
I mean, I say it once, I say it 1,000 times. Like I probably said it, I don't know, at least 100 times on this show through the 20 or so episodes we already have. It's because what I hear all the time when I think of, okay, so I'll get home from work and I'll sit down and I'll watch, I'll be like, oh, Young Turks is coming on, and Cenk Uygur will sit up there and go, I don't understand. I don't understand this, and I don't get why they're doing it. I'm like, dude. And I hear this in my life too from like people who are just centrist Democrats, who are like, oh, Nancy Pelosi, I don't know why she's doing this or that. I go, because these people have placed a bet, and they've placed a bet correctly that the right wing having so much power does not hurt them, because they have enough money, class, and privilege to be protected from the right wing's policies. The things that will substantially, quote unquote, hurt them is if somebody bumps their tax bracket up, bumps them up to the next tax bracket. What will hurt them is hurt them in the pocketbook is Democratic candidates and lawmakers that come along and want economic and social justice. And so you cannot have social justice without having economic justice. That's why they are fine with being They're controlled opposition. The Democratic Party is controlled opposition. They are fine losing. They are fine being the party that gets to go. That silly Trump in his small hands. Can you believe that he doesn't know how to spell potato? Can you believe that he's such a dummy man? Can you believe he committed all those crimes? Well, you want to impeach him, Nancy? Oh no, I never said anything like that. Of course you don't, because you get to make fundraising emails and letters, and you get to rile up your base and get money in that you're going to use to pay off your consultants for the next election to keep actual good politicians like Caban and AOC and try to keep Ilhan Omar down and Bernie Sanders, so they don't come in and they don't change your world and distribute your ill-gotten gains. That's what it is. They are controlled opposition at the end of the day. They're not here to help.
Yeah, they don't want to dismantle anything. They want to maintain the status quo so that they continue to profit from it. But then you brought up something interesting too, that it's a little bit different than what we're talking about, but right, like this whole idea of chalking up Trump's bigotry, just and his racism, all of this, and chalking it up to either an intellectual disability or a mental health diagnosis drives me bananas.
Not only is it extremely lazy, but it's extremely it's connecting people who would have a mental disability.
Right.
Go ahead. I'm taking your point away. I'm sorry.
It's completely ableist, but then also it then allows people to not admit that there are systemic right, like racism is racism,
right,
and racism is due to systemic and institutionalized structures that have been in place in this country forever.
And
so
fear.
by saying that Trump clearly has a mental health disability is allowing you to ignore that.
Yeah. So you're saying he's exceptional in the sense that he's such an idiot or whatever.
Right. And then aside with that too, it then almost tries to make it seem like you can explain away racism with mental illness, which is just so scary.
Right. And if Tom Cotton wins the presidency in 2024, it'll be fine, because at least he's he plays by the rules and he wants to bomb Iran too.
That plays into the whole. That plays into the controlled opposition of you can't call what Trump is. He's a collection. He's the Frankenstein of capitalism, money and politics, and corporate greed. You can't call him that, because you still want to be able to go get cocktails after the Senate or the House vote with your Republican buddies, and it feeds into the myth of it was Joe Biden saying that Trump is an abomination, and Obama even said in the second term we'll get the Republicans to their fever to break. Their fever will break, and they'll vote with us. And I tell you what, there's two things I ain't never seen before. That's a UFO and a good meaning Republican, a good meaning right winger. That's never gonna happen. At least you're gonna say something about the Civil War flip and all that.
One of those things might be real, and it ain't the Republican.
Yeah, exactly. Area 51. Let me see them aliens.
Go ahead. You were making a point. I'm sorry. You were making a point.
Yeah, you're good. I'm done.
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that I totally agree. And I think that also the minute that folks like Nancy Pelosi, if they were to actually bring that up, then what would end up happening is people would look at everything she's doing a little bit more closely, and she doesn't necessarily want that.
and like you were saying earlier, it necessarily muddies the water between saying the people in Congress, the Republicans in Congress, or even the Republicans and Democrats. What do they value when they talk about Congress being effective? They talk about bipartisanship, right? We have to all come together and we have to push for policies collectively, which collectively means in this sense. They don't use that word first off, but pushes policies as Democrats and Republicans coming together in a bipartisan way, and we can both, destroy public services together.
And just be really civil.
Yeah,
right?
Be really civil. I'm really worried that you said. I said this on the radio show before too.
That's that West Wing bullshit.
I said this on the radio show before too. When we went to Baton Rouge lobbying for the SB2, the teacher pay raise for statewide and everything like that, we were targeting a couple of particular politicians, and one of them was named Polly Thomas, who's looking for re-election, and her district. I can't remember which number it is right now, but we sort of like targeted her and went and talked to her, and I started like get her, kind of in the point where I'm like, she's actually stopped and listening to me. I don't want to say cornered because that could be, but anyway, I start talking about, so there's two different resolutions that are on the floor. One of them would be long-term pay raises. The other one is sort of like a one-time stipend. Mm-hmm. And so I told her to support SB2, and the other one is crap. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you going to say any more curse words?" And it's like, is that what you think I'm worried about right now? The fact that I hurt your fucking fifis,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they're wild with it. Like the only thing they want to do is hold on to their seat, and the way that they're going to do that is they need corporate money from the same corporations that are given to Republicans, so they can run their little. They can run their campaigns and hold on to their seat and put more riders in for those same corporations when they write bills. It's just a cycle of, I don't know. Was it the Daily Show? No, it was. And I don't even like John Oliver that much, but he went into the whole the dial time for senators, how much time they spend on the phone, like trying to raise money, and it's. So I didn't know. I knew that it's like, okay, it's re-election season. I got to get this money. But I didn't know that that's what you do on day one. Like you a chunk of on pretty much every day goes to calling like big donors in your district, trying to get money from them. And how the fuck on earth do we think like when that's all done that those people aren't going to come? The bill's not going to be due, and those people aren't going to come and want legislation that's written for them. Or do we not even care anymore? Like, I think it's the thing, we don't even care. So when you see, that's what's so dangerous about a Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar and AOC is that these people you're seeing, to use a racial slur, people seeing that people who've gone, the way they look at it, people who've gone off the reservation, who they're beholden to nobody, and they're like, how dare they just do what they want to do? Like, I have to do what Raython tells me to do, and Honeywell and Bell attack helicopters. How dare they just get to freewheel and say whatever they want to say and not have to focus test everything? It's like, it just makes me really sad about the conditions of our government. And I to be honest, to like share a little thing, like I would actually like to run for public office one day. And I'm sure I'm just building up a case against myself doing this show every week. But honestly, I'd like to run for State House because that's where all the crazy stuff is. If you ever watch your state, forget C-SPAN. If you want entertainment, like watch your local State House. That's where like all the crazy shit happens.
Or your city council.
Yeah, city council, yeah, but like state houses, they go wild, especially like in here in Louisiana, because you have people from New Orleans yelling at somebody from like Thibodeau, and it's just like they're speaking two different dialects. It's like two different like species of human just going at each other, just yelling. But I just really, unless we get money out of politics, like we're on the tipping point. I feel like this has just become the alarmist show, but I feel like we're just on the tipping point of either fascism or socialism, and like only one can win, and we're gonna go one way or the other. Things are gonna get so bad to where people. I mean, look at Puerto Rico. Like, look at Puerto Rico. Look at Hong Kong. These things are not just about a racist governor in Puerto Rico or extradition rights in Hong Kong. These things are trying to throw off the yoke of imperialism. Like it's not a coincidence that two commonwealths, two empires of two imperial nations at the same time are having revolutions in the street.
1/3 of Puerto Ricans on the street.
Yeah, it's not. This is not a coincidence. These people want a complete change of government. No, go ahead.
I was just thinking we should probably talk to Christine about this. But anyway,
she seems busy.
But anyway, you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, I one thing that you said, Robert, that really resonated with me was like the need to take money out of politics, and like there's a lot of things that I am hopeful for, and I think that like I love that there are like you mentioned John Oliver bringing up how much money politicians are spending on the phone, and I think that a lot of people saw that, right? But that's sort of a niche. I never know how to say that. Niche.
That's fine.
Niche audience. And then I feel like now there are actual elected officials that are mentioning it, right? Like I know about it because AOC was talking about it. And so she was like, hey.
Liz Warren just talked about
Yes.
it like a while. She's got it in her ad. She's like, I'm not doing call time anymore. I'm calling Sally and we're talking about, what kind of dogs she likes.
Right. Like
all right, Liz.
She's doing the thing where she's, instead of calling corporations, I think she's like calling like small donors, right? Is that what she's doing? So yeah, I think of Elizabeth Warren and I think of AOC for really bringing that to my attention, which gives me hope because I think that that's reaching perhaps a wider audience than like John Oliver. But
or even Bernie Sanders,
Right.
like Bernie's been doing that for years, but
Oh,
he
yeah.
doesn't have the sort of like same. Well, the kind of like press coverage he gets is always sort of like he's been doing this forever because he's so weird, and now everybody's like sort of like sliding into step with him because they're smart and they can feel the wave.
Yeah. It's and so I think. But I'm like, what does that look like? Like, how do we do that? Because then I think about someone like Cory Booker, who, right, who takes so much money from corporations, right? Pharmaceuticals.
He was with charter schools. He actually spoke at Betsy DeVos's American Federation of Children, which is like destroy public education.
Yeah. And so I there's like two, right? Those are two extremes, right? Like you have folks that are like refusing to do it, and then you have folks where I'm like, oh, like you. If we actually do that, like you got to figure something out because your
hustle's gone.
Yeah. But I'd like to think that can continue, and I think Bernie Sanders is like a great example of like how that gives me hope because even though there is no candidate that is as progressive as he is or as aligned with my own sociopolitical values as him, like what was wild was just to see on the debate floor, which debates are
limited,
a whole other thing, but just to see like the amount of influence that he's had on every single candidate.
Yeah.
Not even the most, the next most progressive. Every single person on that stage has clearly been influenced by his policies, his beliefs. And so I think that that's what like gets me to sleep at night.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about this, I have a couple of thoughts on all of this. I'll talk to the debate part first, and which is like super interesting to me that when people have their like hot takes about like who won and who lost at the debate, Kamala Harris eviscerated Joe Biden, and that all did happen. But like in the rhetorical command of the debate in a really real way is what you just mentioned. All of these questions that they're asking is that like Bernie Sanders supports Medicare for all and the abolition of your of private insurers. Do you support this? So basically the questions that the moderators are asking are all coming and springing from these Bernie Sanders policy. While Bernie Sanders is on the stage with everybody, like they're talking about him like he's like some like historical philosopher or whatever, or a crank, both, or kind of both.
Right, and I mean, I think that one positive thing to take away from that too is then to use that as the next time someone says, oh no, we need to pick someone who's more moderate, more centrist, you can use that as an example to be like, actually we don't, because
we don't need to compromise in the beginning.
Right. So we don't need to do that because we are already slowly, not as fast enough as I think any of us would like. We're shifting there, and we actually just need to be like unapologetic about that, right? Like uncompromising. And I think that when people say that we need to elect someone like Joe Biden, I'm like, what are you afraid of? Like why? Because everything that's been happening, while we haven't been, having all the wins that I would like, we have had significant things happen where like we just need to continue to just push and demand for these shifts. And I just, whenever I hear somebody say that no, we can never elect someone so progressive, it makes me.
It's like I said before. It's like it's the myth of the good right winger, and here's where I'm gonna get super aggressive, and the reason why gerrymandering exists, like you don't have to listen to people and be like, oh, the right wing's never going to vote for Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren or anything like that, because first of all, they're so divisive. First of all, Joe Biden and Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and politicians like that never have to answer that question of how are you going to bring over young people, or how it's just assume that you'll just follow suit. It's a lot like that Ilhan Omar retort, if you've seen that in the news. She's like, I don't understand why I have to keep answering these questions about female genital mutilation and about Hamas, because you're asking me these things because I'm a Muslim. Like, you don't ask white male politicians this in the United States. So going back, nobody asked Joe Biden, well, how are you going to convert young people, or how are you going to get Republicans to vote for you, and this and that. It's only people with actual policies that get these questions. But here's the trick that the media, the mainstream media, which there is no liberal media, is trying to pull over your eyes. We outnumber them. That's why the Republican Party and the GOP has to gerrymander. They have to put their thumb on the scale. They have to rig the game. We have all the numbers. We hold all the doors. We have all the keys. All we have to do is get people out there to push the button and pull the lever. That's it. They are done. They're done. I don't need to concede to them. I don't need to appease to them. I don't need their permission to live. I don't need their permission to feed, educate, and house people. I don't need none of that. We just have to do what we have to do and get the right people in positions of power and stop placating to these people. In the story.
Yeah, this reminds me of how people call like Texas and Georgia red states, and I'm like, no, actually they're not, right? Like
red state to blue state divide is total BS,
right? But also, like, if we look at the actual populations of those states and actually did not do things like gerrymandering or have such rampant voter suppression.
So you steal the election from Stacey Abrams?
Those are right. Like, those states are quote unquote red because elections have been bought and stolen. And so that's sort of like, when you said that, that's what I was thinking of, you know?
I want to go back to money in politics specifically, and sort of like, I don't view it sort of in exactly the same way that y'all do. I do see that it's a problem in the sense that it definitely has influence over the sort of politicians who are involved, and I think that kind of a framework kind of can't not exist in a capitalist society. You know, I think that's sort of like that's part of the game, and that's how it's set up, and the like legislation. Or even constitutional amendments or whatever would be workarounds. And I think the only actual solution to kind of getting these people out, or getting like actually a more representative of working class people government, is through mass movement. And that has to be through material condition type politics like the ones that Sanders, AOC, and Ilhan Omar specifically, Rashida Tlaib as well. The way that the politics that they push actually can kind of get the working class empowered just simply by putting the things that would like materially benefit them on the table. And the next part is developing the structures so that they can express that power. And what structures are there? Again, we talked about, to bring it full circle back to labor unions, in an organizing capacity so that they can have leverage in lobbying. Or whatever, or not even lobbying, just like express their power in different ways. They can have influence, or community groups of people that can push for legislation. Mass movement is the solution rather than changing the rules, because I think that there's always going to be. Now there are, and again, I'm not saying that it's not policy worth pursuing. I just don't see a mass movement developing around money in politics the same way.
Okay, here's the thing too, and this is like another kind of rhetorical thing that I do share this with a lot of normies. It's like kind of my own pet theory, but I don't know if I've said it on the show yet. Here's the problem. Why the GOP keeps winning, why reactionaries keep winning is one, they cheat. They straight up cheat. Mm-hmm. Two, their brains. Something in their brain, when you get those kind of people, reactionaries, they are authoritarian by nature. And it's hard to break them off of that. So they need daddy, a Trump, a Reagan, or whatever, to tell them what to do. And they are fully, and they're tribal, and they're fully on that team when they're on that team, and they're gonna do that whole emotional investment thing, and they're gonna go down with the ship. It's hard to get them off of that path once they're going, because they get in a very tribalistic mindset. The left problem is that we are very anti-authoritarian. Like, that is something like hardwired into us to where we want to do our own thing, which is great. But for a mass movement to form, it's so hard to form one because it's like herding cats. Because everybody wants to do their own thing, and nobody wants to just, when it comes down to it, it's great that everybody wants to do their own thing and everybody has their projects or whatnot. But when it's time to roll, we need to shut up, form together like Voltron, get that thing that we got to get done, and then we can all go back into our little groups and do that thing. And until that happens, we just keep getting divided and split up, because think of the people you know, even in the DSA, who have completely given up on electoral politics for very good reasons. Think of the people I know who are the same way. Think of the people who we both know who are way too into electoral politics and think that electoral politics is the only way that's going to get stuff done. And once you start having these conversations, they're like, well, they're canceled. Everybody's canceled. Everybody cancels out each other and nothing can get done. The right does not do that. The right does not do that at all. It's like that. It's like in Spaceballs when Darth Helmet tells dude, he goes, evil will always win because good is dumb. Like, it's kind of like that, to where when it's time to rock, we don't want to get together, do the thing we have to do, and support each other afterwards. I don't know. That's my thing. Everybody's like, man, I'm turning this shit off. I'm tired. I don't need him telling me how to live.
Oh, I'm going to tell everybody how to live. You have a thought on that?
I think it's so tricky. I mean, I hear everything that you're saying, and I was just having this conversation or a similar conversation like this yesterday where, you know, someone said to me, the Republicans are so powerful because they're, like you said, like they're
in lockstep.
They're in lockstep, and like and you know.
Think about never Trumpers. How many people were never Trumpers? Sitting up there, Ted Cruz. He said your wife is ugly. He said your dad killed JFK. He said, well, y'all don't vote for Trump. If motherfucker was making calls for Trump, they have no conviction. It's something he should have. You know what? I tell you what. If Ted Cruz would have came on that damn debate stage and just said, I got nothing to say, and just popped him, I would have been like, I might do a little crossover vote. He at least gained some respect, but they have no backbone, no respect for themselves or anything else.
He could shoot Ted Cruz on Madison Avenue, and Ted Cruz would still vote for him.
Yeah, and so I like, right, like that lockstep in that party is so real, and I think you're right. Like we like on the left, like everyone sort of has their own thing. Well, I can't say on the left because everyone is, but like I guess like Democrats, and then like everyone has their own thing, and we're not. But I want to be really careful to not talk about unity, right? Like, because that's where I think it gets tricky.
That means somebody has to shut up, and they don't get anything, and have to wait their turn.
Right, and that's not what you're saying at all.
We don't have to be. Think of we're 90s babies. Like, we watched the Power Rangers, right? All the Power Rangers were you had the black one and the Asian one and the white guy and the nerdy guy. But when the monster grew and got big, they all formed into the big Megazord. They beat up the monster, and then they dissipated back and became individual Power Rangers. That's all I'm saying.
Billy was smart, not a nerd. You have a great point. But you can continue your point.
Yeah. No. So I was just sort of like making that like distinction because I think that 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 the distinction is important, and I agree with you. I just I think right now I just don't know I'm a very concrete person. I just don't know what that looks like. I know what it looks like on the Power Rangers, but because I loved that show. But
Chaim Saban, by the way, is canceled.
Oh yeah, he's canceled. Dead.
And so I guess I'm trying to figure out what that looks like right now when we have so many people like Pelosi who I just don't think have our backs, right? And so I think that in order for this to be a Power Ranger thing where everyone comes together, right? The Power Rangers all had each other's backs. They had
she ain't on the Power Rangers.
Right. and the Democratic Party likes to pretend that what we all have in common is that we're all driven by similar morals and values, but that's actually not true. That's actually that's a narrative that they're telling us, and
it's a ruling class narrative,
right? And so I think that there's so many people that I don't trust to do that, to do what you're talking about. I want that to happen.
Ain't nobody gonna do it but us. I mean, when I say us, I mean so when I say, Bernie Sanders, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and the rest of the gang, Ilhan Omar, I mean them and us versus all them motherfuckers.
Right. And then I think also not to forget all of the more local folks that are being so I'm moving back to Somerville, Massachusetts, and in 2015 or 16 our local rep, his name's Mike Connolly, he's a DSA member in Massachusetts. He unseated an incumbent that had been there for years. Dope. And Massachusetts is known to be it's quote unquote blue and progressive, but in actuality, we're not.
Elite New England liberalism is what that is.
And so for him to actually to take that seat was a pretty big deal, and he's still there, and he's doing really important work around fighting against austerity politics, and really doing a lot of good work around trying to stop the MBTA from increasing hikes and fare hikes. And so I also think that a lot of big name politicians at the federal level have been getting a lot of but I think it's all the folks at the more local level too. In Chicago, there's a hand over, this might not be right, but aren't there over 10 DSA members that are in elected?
I know a lot ran. I know Rosanna Rodriguez was closely associated with the teachers union, and she lost by another handful of votes, sort of thing. Carlos Ramirez Rosa comes to mind. I don't know how many. I know that there were a lot that DSA got behind in Chicago, and they got feats on the streets to get to make it happen, and they did get victories. I can't from memory tell you exactly where we're at, but they did get some of these sort of local, they call them alderman seats, that were filled with some people who were very much a challenge to the sort of governing elite in Chicago, which is great. So that's super inspire. Well, inspire. I kind of don't love that word, but it's kind of encouraging, I suppose.
Yeah, I try to be it gives me some hope. It's I've been using I can sleep at night now, right? It's
3 seats on the city council.
Okay.
Out of how many? 12?
Yeah.
That's not too bad. Is it 12 or is it really 12? Or?
I'm looking.
Okay.
For Google, but I think that's right.
I think it might be way more than that. But anyway, I'm just gonna keep talking and sound like an idiot and be wrong over and over again. So I'm just gonna stop and quit while my head and also 50. 3 out of 50. So that's 6%.
10%. They have 10%. The DSA has 10% in the city council.
Say again?
It's 10% of Chicago City Council is DSA members.
That ain't bad. It's definitely a lot of work to go. But I think that part of building the movement, and Robert alluded to this earlier, sort of the seas sort of rise, and they people get all fired up about something for a little while, and then it sort of goes away, and not leaving any sort of structures to engage with any longer. It's sort of like, oh, well, we did our thing and we're back at square one, and now, we're back to there again. We need to, like, as a working class struggle movement, and class struggle ain't just like a one-time bang, you go to do the thing and it's finished. Class struggle is forever, or at least until we have this, like, until the workers have taken over. So it's all the time, forever, and in 100% day to day how you live your life, and you sort of like reading how like what the forces in the society are and how people are operating, capitalizing and making them durable, lasting structures that you can build upon the next time there's this next level of interest and engagement, and try and capitalize on that again to make them better and better and better over time. That's the only way that can win. That's the only way I see it, at least. That the working class can sort of develop a way to overthrow the capitalist structures. So, anybody want to talk about anything else, or
what does everybody got going on before we can get out of here? What do you got? I know you're moving.
Yeah, I am moving on Wednesday. Gonna drive up to Massachusetts and maybe not have as much humidity in the air, but we'll see. So I'm just trying to, for the next week or so, just enjoy being in the city.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I'm doing this quaint little podcast that is doing exponential growth right now. It's pretty good. I haven't looked at don't try not to obsess over the stats. When I look at it, we're growing. Getting Patreon subscribers now, which is great. I bought Marvel Ultimate Alliance on Switch the other day. I could not. Walmart had it for $10 off, and I had to buy some groceries anyway. So I went ahead and got that. Mostly, honestly, so I can play with my little brother. He's like 12, and he's in Cincinnati. So I only see him maybe once or twice a year. So we're gonna start playing the games over the interwebs. I know you say you picked up, we talked about last week, you picked up that We the Revolution game. It's pretty good. And I wish I could get my little brother, I would have just bought it for him. Just call it the Wolfenstein expansion comes out tomorrow on Switch, but it's already out.
It's the Nazi killing game, right?
Yeah, it's already out on PC. It's the most, forget the Nazi killing, it's the most feminist game of all time.
Feminist Wolfenstein.
It really is. So, if you don't know, because you're looking at me like, wow, what's that? So it's a series. We'll be out here in just a sec. Yeah. It's a series from I would say the 90s, where you're just this guy, you go kill Nazis in the Nazi castle, and they redid it to where you're doing the same thing. You're killing Nazis. Nazis have taken over America. And so you've woken up, you're like, the old thing, you're like Captain America, you're a man out of time. And you're like, oh, this thing's going to revolve, I'm the Nazi killer, I kill all the Nazis. Well, you have to find the American resistance, and it's led by this woman it's like a black woman it's like the woman who used to be on Mad TV, I can't think of her name, but she does the voice for her, and she's a legit Black Panther. And pretty much you're just taking orders from her at that point. And it pissed so many incel chuds. They're like, I don't understand. I'm supposed to be the hero of this story. And I'm like, that's the point, stupid. It's you're just the muscle.
Get immersed in a freaking character and then just have fun playing the game, you jerks.
So they do this and then they do this other thing where you have, you've got a girlfriend or whatever, and your whole thing is if I kill all these Nazis, I'm going to propose to her because she's the best woman I ever met. And so she's already pregnant with your kids, she's got twins or whatever in her belly. So there's this thing at the end, the very end of the game, where the Nazis are they've got you dead to rights, and she just chucks a grenade in the room, and she's wearing a military style blouse. And it's but she's got the big belly, and she's just got dual machine guns, big belly out, just blood splatter with Nazis everywhere. I'm this is the most feminist game I've ever played. So in the new one, the expansion one, you play as, it's 18 years later, and you play as it's a co-op game, and you play as his twin daughters. And you're like, Dad's gone missing in Paris, so we have to go find Dad and murder Nazis. That's literally in the game trailer. And I want to get that for my little brother, but I don't think my mom's going to put the kibosh on that. She's going to let that happen. But yeah, it's great.
Wow.
Yeah. Anything else, anybody?
No.
No, thanks for having me. It was so fun chatting.
Thanks. And maybe you can call in sometime and just talk about how things are going in Massachusetts.
Yeah,
and
that'd be great.
Sort of like we can just kind of keep in touch because really had a great time talking with you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Plug this stuff.
I do have one announcement, and then I'm gonna plug, and then we're gonna go home. On August 9th, the Labor Standing Committee of the Democratic Socialists of America is going to have a parent and teacher social at WHIV Studios. We just found out that Blake is cooking again, and he knows what he's doing. Nice. Blake made the food for the Eric Blanc event. Sorry, he won't be here for that.
It's amazing.
He made like really good falafel and like good like Mediterranean food.
So all of our listeners in Queensland, Australia, like I'm being dead serious right now, fly in for that.
Yeah,
come meet us there.
Yep. You have some time.
Especially if you care about schools, but even if you don't, we'd love to see you. Yeah, so sorry.
Yeah, no, it sounds like I mean, I'm so bummed I can't be here for that event.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like what we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a great way to just like get this conversation started.
Yeah,
and,
parents, teachers, school workers, all in the same space, and we can sort of like at least get them talking to one another, and maybe we can put together another like a forum on sort of like policy, hopefully somewhere down the line. That's all for announcements. Anybody else want to plug anything? All right, you can listen to the show at 8 o'clock on 8 a.m., not p.m., 8 a.m. on Tuesday mornings on WHIV LP New Orleans. 8 a.m. Central, by the way. And we have people all over the world, Central Standard Time at Chicago time. WHIV LP New Orleans 102.3, WHIVFM.org/listen. You can also go to our website, goodmorningcomrade.com. You can email us, info@goodmorningcomrade.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Comrade Morning, Instagram, Facebook, Good Morning Comrade, and Patreon. So hit us up, and we'll see you next time. Love you.